Hello, welcome to this tutorial on the relationship of C1, C2 and C3 vertebrae. The relationship can often seem intimidating. However, when you break the relationship between C1 and C2 and C2 to C3, the relationship between C1, C2, C3 vertebrae becomes more obvious. To understand the relationship between C1, C2 and C3 vertebrae, it is important to appreciate that the C2 vertebra is a transition vertebra between C1 and C3 vertebrae. The C2 vertebra needs to have elements to articulate with the C1 vertebra and elements to articulate with the C3 vertebra. That's why its anatomy is more complex. And this understanding is pivotal to understanding the relationship between the three vertebrae. Let's initially look at the C1 vertebra. This is the superior view of the C1 vertebra, and this is the inferior view of the C1 vertebra. You can see the superior articular process of the lateral mass of C1 is lying relatively anteriorly, and underneath it the inferior articular process of the lateral mass of C1 is also lying relatively anteriorly. For this to make a joint with the C2 vertebra, the superior articular process of the lateral mass of C2 has to lie anteriorly as well. This is exactly what we see with the C2 vertebra. The superior articular process of the lateral mass, if we could call it, is lying relatively anteriorly to take the inferior articular process of the lateral mass of C1. Again, you can see that the superior articular process is lying relatively anteriorly laterally to the peg. Now let's look at the C3 vertebra. This is the superior articular process of the facet of C3. Look where it is. It is relatively posterior compared to where the C1 is joining to C2. So if the C3 articular surface of the facet is posterior, for C2 to make a joint, it has to have the inferior articular process posterior as well. That's what you are seeing. And this complex makes the usual shape of two rhomboids. So if you make a line, imaginary line across the meridian of C2, you can see the anterior part of the top region is to make a joint with C1, whereas the posterior one is to make a joint with the facet of C3. The bone in between these two articular processes is called the pars inter-articularis. The pars inter-articularis in C3 is here, and it's a straight line vertically going as the two articular surfaces are in the same vertical line. But here, the superior articular process of C2 is anterior and the inferior articular process is posterior. So there's a diagonal bone, a quite prominent area, which is the pars inter-articularis of C2. So as long as you understand this C2 is made to make a joint with C1 and C3, you can immediately understand the anatomy of C2. Another important thing is to understand the difference between pars inter-articularis of C2 from the pedicle of C2. As we said earlier, the pars inter-articularis, as the name itself suggests, is between the superior and inferior articular process. But this is not the pedicle. Pedicle, by definition, joins the body of the vertebra to the posterior neural arch. That in this case will be, pedicle will be somewhere here. So pars interarticularis is here, as the pedicle is there, more media. This difference between pars interarticularis and pedicle in C2 is important to understand when you come to look at fixations involving C2. One of the operations in C1-C2 instability or fracture of the peg would be to fix C1 to C2. One of the operations would be to put a screw into the lateral mass of C1 and another screw into the pars interarticularis of C2 and then connect them up with a rod. So here the screw into the atlas will be into the lateral mass of C1 and the screw into the C2 would be into the pars interarticularis. Another variation of this operation is inserting the screw into the pedicle of C2. For that, you need to start more laterally in the pars interarticularis and angle the screw medially so it goes towards the pedicle. It's more difficult operation. So that is the difference between C1 lateral mass, C2 pars interarticularis, and C1 lateral mass and C2 pedicle screws. I hope this short tutorial was helpful for you in understanding the anatomical relationships between C1, C2 and C3 and visualizing the anatomy of this area as well as understanding the C1, C2 screw fixations. I will delve into other operations related to this area on a later tutorial. In the meantime, I wish you a good day. Thank you and bye.